What's going on, guys? I'm Chris and this is Regular Guy Training. Today we're going to talk about the Wesson Specialist, the full-size version in 9mm. This one was cut for a dot since the last video that I did on it. And that was after I sold it to a friend of mine because I was trying to fund other things and he decided he was going to keep on using it. So between me using it and between him using it, between two of us doing a whole bunch of shooting, we got 24,000 rounds. In that 24,000 rounds, a lot of stuff got replaced, mostly just standard parts and that sort of stuff. You know, just regular maintenance and that sort of thing. Generally speaking, we figured out whether or not the thing is actually going to work, because after 24,000 rounds, you more or less have a good idea of whether or not the thing is going to be just something that you should hang on to or not. We more or less figured out how to make sure that it runs good as far as like recoil spring usage and everything else, because there's a lot of different people that say a lot of different stuff about just the different poundages that you want to use. And of course, I've more or less come to my conclusions on what I think about this thing overall and whether or not you should get one. So look, I'm just going to be straight with you. I have an unreasonable attachment to 1911 and 2011 style guns, and frankly I shouldn't, because they're mostly abysmal. And the reason why I say that is, well, honestly, there's just a lot of nonsense that you have to deal with when getting into it. The startup cost is a lot. The replacement parts cost is going to be a lot. The magazines that never seem to be 100% reliable literally ever cost an enormous amount, because just fine, I guess that's just how it's going to be. And anytime that you really want to do anything with them as far as just making modifications and all of that, this is going to come after a battery of other stuff that you do to the gun in order to make it run the way you need it to. For instance, this particular handgun was straight out the box something that I had to mess with as far as the trigger bow on the inside of the magazine well to make sure the friggin' magazines drop free out of the thing. Also, stepping away from the 2011 talk for a second, single stack 9mm 1911 guys really don't get away from the nonsense that 2011 people have to deal with, because while you're dealing with 2011 magazines, which are all basically terrible unless you bought a platypus, and no, I don't know anything about the platypus because I've never actually touched one in my life, you're going to be dealing with tons of nonsense, and these guys are dealing with tons of nonsense too, because this is basically just a 45 caliber sized magazine that was pressed along the sides to make sure that your 9mm handgun ran. And of course, these 10-shot magazines that you want to stick into this gun, once you stuck a 10-shot magazine into the gun and charged it, chances are that if you pull that magazine out, the round that's just supposed to be next is going to just eject out of the magazine, because life hates you because you decided that you were going to get into 1911s. And just about every time that anyone asks me whether or not that they should get into 1911s or 2011s, I tell them basically, no, stop. That's not great if you like having a normal and sane life, and if you enjoy just loving things, because this is the first and finest way to ensure that you work on a gun far more than you ever actually shoot it. All of that salt aside, for some reason I really do like these, because frankly, shooting well with them is pretty easy to do for the most part, and for some reason getting a really clean shot reload shot off of these just has the correct amalgamations of cool clankety sounds that makes me feel real good for no reason. So I decided a while back that I was going to go ahead and pick up a not Kimber or Taurus, so a non-custom gun that's actually going to run, and I was going to run the bejesus out of it to see if it would actually be, worth it, because I shot one of these, because I bought one of these forever ago on 45, and I really did enjoy that. And frankly, if I was going to keep one of these two, I would have kept the 45, because it is frankly a better performer for reasons I'm going to get to here in just a second. That said, as far as overall performance and regular maintenance is concerned, this thing wasn't really that much different than a lot of other handguns of its variety. Now, it's got an internal extractor, so you're going to have to tune/replace that part and that sort of thing, and do that rigmarole about every 5,000-6,000 rounds. And there's really no negotiating that, because it was like dead set every time. 5,000 to 6,000 rounds, I'm gonna run into problems, and those problems are gonna be consistent. So I gotta make sure that this is changed right at that mark, And if I really needed this thing to run before like a steel challenge competition or whatever, I need to make sure that that was in that little zone and that it was going to work well, because if it was on the edge, it was never going to run. In addition to this, anybody that does a lot of 1911/2011 style shooting is going to end up restaking your safety plunger at one point, unless you buy a whole bunch of the guns and then also shoot them a lot, which you're not, because these guns are real expensive and all their little magazines are expensive. So you're only going to really buy one, really like it, and then go back to carrying your Glock or whatever for your day-to-day activities. That not being the point at all to what I was getting ready to say, though, as far as additional parts that I've had to have replaced on this, these main springs were replaced twice, in addition to the fact that recoil springs regularly went out basically the same time that the extractors were tuned or replaced. The difference between tuning and replacing was essentially you could get away with tuning an internal extractor on this essentially twice. After that, you would need to just replace the whole thing, because the extractors themselves on this design are not very strong to begin with. That said, as far as overall controls and that sort of thing, occasionally, especially on like 45s that get shot a lot, you see things like ambi safeties that will bend and things like that. This shipped with, frankly, very large and really robust controls, and that includes the ambi safety, which never bent or bowed or anything like that on me, so that's nice. I will always really, really like the large slide lock lever that's on the Dan Wesson Specialist, regardless of the size that's available. In addition to this, as far as finishes go, a lot of people also thoroughly understand that do a lot of 1911 and 2011 stuff that, well, for some reason, a lot of stuff that you bolt to 1911s or just in general 1911s really, really try as hard as they can to rust as often as possible in the randomest places. Like, your slide and frame finish might be fine, but this front sight blade that you bought for some reason is just not protected at all against any rust ever. Or, again, slide and frame are great as far as rust prevention is concerned, but your beaver tail is going to rust for some reason. Or the magazine well that you're trying to install, the top half of that, just the half, for no reason, is going to try to rust. And as far as that category is concerned, this handgun is frankly no different. It's really, really rust proof in most places. But in things like the magazine well, the screws that hold the grip panels into place, the friggin' beaver tail, for some reason, will try and rust on you. And this huge front sight blade on here that my buddy installed after he got this thing cut for a dot also likes to rust really fast for no reason at all. So there's that. Well, what about long-term handling? What are the things that I've learned about the Dan Wesson Specialist? Well, I've shot the full-size version of this, obviously, but I also shot the 4-inch barreled version of this, essentially the commander-sized version of this, where you got a full-size frame and a 4-inch barrel and accommodating slide, of course, that go with it. I gotta tell you, between the two, if it's in 45, the 5-inch is just the way to go. I don't really like anything smaller than 5-inch guns in 45s that have to also do with 1911s. That said, because I really like 45s in that size, I decided I was going to go ahead and get the 5-inch 9mm version. And I'm going to tell you, the whole idea of a Dan Wesson Specialist and that sort of thing is great. It's a pretty good production gun. As far as all the extra nonsense that you're going to have to put up with, it doesn't give you more than average, which is already a lot, which is great. That said, I could not also possibly tell anybody to get this handgun ever. And look, here's the deal. It runs fine, it's accurate, it's reliable when maintained aggressively. That said, though, for some reason, the 5-inch 9mm handguns that I've just noticed, and this is like 2011 and 1911 like stuff in general, I've just noticed that, look, the 4-inch barreled guns just handle a little bit better. It's a little bit less return bounce. The action cycle's just a little bit faster, which allows me to get back on a little bit quicker. You don't necessarily feel overmatched in the slide weight department, if that makes any sense. And the best way that I can compare this is like this, right? There's a lot of people that have Glock 19s, And yeah, they're a little jabby, but most people, once they get used to them, it's like, okay, the gun's pretty fast, you can keep it pretty flat. Guys that have 19s and 17s acknowledge that, you know, the bigger frame is kind of nice to have and that sort of thing, but for some reason, it just handles just a little bit worse, and they can never put their finger on it until they get a 19X or a 45 and realize, holy crap, this gun handles better than all of them. And the reason for that is you have the advantage of the full-size frame and all the stuff that hooks up to your slide and that sort of thing in that similar way, and the slightly larger grip, in conjunction with the fact that the action cycles just a little bit faster, but you have a full-size frame on it, so it handles just a little bit better, versus the extra weight on that slide that is most likely giving you a little bit more return bounce than you would like, which has an opposite whippy effect, which for some reason turns into a handling characteristic that you can't quite put a finger on. And that's no different with a pistol like this. With the 4-inch barreled version of this, I noticed that it does in fact handle significantly better. So between myself and the buddy of mine that owns this, that shot this a lot, I mean, I shot it a lot, and he shot it a bunch too, and, you know, it's a great handgun. It does fine. Don't buy it. Buy the smaller version instead. Which is frankly par for the course as far as 1911 stuff is in general, where it's just kind of like, yeah, it handles great. Please God, buy something else if you like having a sane existence, and if you just don't want to put up with just bullshit for no reason. And this frankly fits the bill as far as that's concerned, and that's not going to change whether or not I like 1911s basically at all. So, with that said, guys, if you want to support us, it'd be great. If you want to take classes from us and that sort of thing, links for all this are in the description below, including the company website, as well as the Patreon stuff, as well as the social media accounts and that sort of thing too. And if you want to support us through Patreon, that's great. If you want to get something out of that, $41 a month gets you as much training as you would like to go take, assuming that this isn't a private class for rather obvious reasons, or a logistically ridiculous class like a soft skin vehicle class for also pretty obvious reasons, because this is a system that's designed to more or less be abused so that we can develop people instead of just see them once a year and be like, bye. So here we go as far as that's concerned. And with that said, guys, I'm gonna quit yapping, and remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy. It's really rust preventive. It's really rust prevention. It's really, really rust proof.